Welcome to the Power to Flourish podcast, where science meets the art of a beautiful life. I'm Dr. Andrea Line, positive psychologist, giftedness expert and coach, and modern-day spiritual godmother to brilliant, deep-feeling women. This isn't just another self-help podcast. It's a sanctuary, a sacred space to come back to yourself. Each week, we'll explore the emotional experience of gifted, sensitive women and what it means to live a life that feels as beautiful as it may look. Because flourishing isn't a luxury, it's your birthright, and your life is waiting. This is the Power to Flourish podcast. Welcome back to the Power to Flourish podcast. I am your host, Dr. Andrea Line, and today we continue the sacred journey of creating a life that feels as good on the inside as it looks on the outside. So I have a question for you. Have you ever been told you're too sensitive? That you think too much, maybe you feel too deeply, or you just make everything too intense? If so, you might be gifted and no one ever told you. Today's episode is for the woman who's been told she's too much, too emotional, too intense, too dramatic. If that's you, I want you to know you're not broken, my dear. You're probably gifted, and the world has just never known what to do with your brilliance. In this episode, I'll break down what giftedness actually looks like in adult women, why it so often goes unseen, and how to begin honoring the truth of who you are. First, what do we usually get wrong about giftedness? Most people don't even use that word and think about adults, right? Unless you're in this kind of work, we don't really go around in our adult lives thinking of people in terminology that we usually reserve for educational settings. Now, I personally do not really like using the G word, gifted. I'm using it here because it really is a shorthand. But when we typically use the word gifted, most people think about grades, IQ scores. We think about school. We might think about gifted and talented programs. Or maybe we think about our children. If we have kids, maybe we're thinking about it through that lens. But we don't usually think about it in terms of our own giftedness. Giftedness in adults often goes unrecognized or misunderstood, especially in women. And this is because even for very bright young girls, once they start getting into middle school, once they enter into adolescence, a very interesting thing starts to happen. And if you think back on your own adolescence, you might recall that strong urge that most teenagers feel where they just want to fit in. And so if you're a really bright kid, whether you're a boy or a girl, there's just things that we might start to change. And for women, that means we often start hiding and masking our brilliance because it makes us stand out typically in ways that feel uncomfortable. Perhaps it attracts some negative attention. We don't want to be the goody two-shoes or the teacher's pet or necessarily the straight A, double A student. I know when I was in junior high, I was surrounded by a group of really bright, fun, creative young women. And there were some of us who felt pretty confident and stuck to our studiousness and our identity in that. But then I watched one by one how certain girls kind of felt like they just started dumbing it down because they got a lot of attention from the boys. Now, that isn't always the case, but that's one reason some things start to shift in adolescence. It's also true that there is some bias, and this is very well documented in the school system in terms of how girls and boys can be treated in academic settings. Once we get into college, certainly past college into our adulthood, all of those labels, and again, whether we were labeled gifted or not, those things fall by the wayside. But the things that don't change are within us. So all the elements that culminated in us maybe being led to getting a certain label as gifted or being seen as the really creative, quirky one, or a really wonderful, talented art student, or perhaps we were extremely gifted in leadership. We certainly still pursue those things in our adult years in different ways, perhaps through our career or other hobbies or other outlets, especially if we're highly creative. But we forget about the parts within ourselves that I'm going to talk about are really connected to this concept that we call giftedness. So what does giftedness actually look like in women? Well, first, as I have mentioned before, there is usually an emotional depth, or some might call it an intensity, that other people just don't experience in the same way. And it's not just a quantitative difference. It's really a qualitative difference of lived experience that many gifted people, gifted women, describe. So what might that look like? It could look like something happening and you feel like your emotional felt reaction, whether you express it or not, the inward emotional reaction is really, really intense. And someone else who could have been in the same exact situation probably has some emotional reaction, but it doesn't hit them quite the same way. And they seem to like bounce back from it a little bit easier. Another trait that we sometimes forget about that's highly related to giftedness, especially in children, but it doesn't go away in your adulthood, is a strong sense of justice or purpose. So that feeling like I'm not happy with this that's happening in the world, or this thing that's happening in my neighborhood or my city or my country is really bothering me, and I feel like I need to take action of some sort. Or I'm driven and I have a strong sense of purpose, right? It's not that other people don't experience those things, but gifted women feel that usually much more strongly and much more intensely. What this can also look like is a very strong sense of empathy, a very strong justice orientation. Like I said, that strong sense of justice, but also what can kind of go into a dark space is existential questioning. We see this in gifted children. We definitely see this in gifted adolescents, but this doesn't always just go away in your adult life, even if you've worked through a lot of those things in your younger years. Another very, very common trait that I think a lot of women in general can relate to, but gifted women in particular, are characterized by perfectionism. One might also just call it very high standards. We might also call it a standard of excellence. I'll probably get into this in another episode, but to me, there is definitely a difference between perfectionism, which is a very slippery slope to a negative place. I'm raising my hand as someone who has struggled with that from childhood. There's a difference between that and having standards of excellence, but gifted women usually self-identify as a perfectionist, or in my case, a constant recovering perfectionist. It can also look like sensitivity to your environment. If you're the kind of person who is visually very sensitive to your environment, this again is it's a kind of intensity that you need to have things look a certain way. And if it's not looking pleasant to your eye, whatever that means to you, then it affects you in a negative way. It might not just be visual. For some people, it could be auditory. For other people, there could be textures that, have to be a certain way. Again, we see this a lot in gifted children, but it doesn't just disappear once you get older. Another common characteristic of gifted women is fast processing and a really complex inner world. Now, with all of these things, please keep in mind that not every gifted person will exhibit every single trait. So you could actually be gifted, but have a processing issue. So that's another discussion, but then we call that twice exceptional, meaning someone is gifted and they have high ability or are very talented in certain ways, but then they have maybe a processing a processing speed issue or an auditory processing issue or some other, a clinical psychologist would call it a disorder or a disability, maybe a learning disability. So gifted women don't always have fast processing, but it's pretty common that our brains just go really, really fast. And sometimes this can make people feel like they have anxious brains, right? Their thoughts are just going so fast and it can be hard to turn it off. So that can be a very common issue that gifted women struggle with is anxiety. And part of it is tied to their brains just going really, really fast and having a hard time slowing it down. It's just the way their brains are made. So to that point, many gifted women are misdiagnosed or mislabeled as anxious, depressed, high maintenance, intense in a negative way, or again, too much. So you may have been labeled intense, difficult, dramatic, high maintenance, any of those things. So you may have been praised for high achievement, but inwardly you felt overwhelmed or unseen. This is a common experience for gifted women. Whether they started to feel this way in their childhood, their teen years, in their 20s, or even much later in life. So as I just explained, there are so many ways giftedness shows up in adult women. I just described a few, but here are a few very specific signs you might recognize. These are 5 signs you might be a gifted woman. Number 1, you feel everything deeply. Your emotional life is intense, vivid, and layered, and sometimes it feels overwhelming. Number 2, you think in spirals, not straight lines. Your mind connects ideas very quickly, sometimes jumping ahead of conversations or struggling to turn off. Number 3, you crave meaning, not just success. You want your work, your life, your relationships to matter, and you can't fake it when they don't. Number 4, you've been labeled as too much, too sensitive, too intense, too dramatic, too idealistic, too emotional, too everything. And number 5, you often feel alone even when you're not. It's hard to feel truly seen or met. You're aware of your depth, but often unsure where you belong. I'm going to go deeper into these in an upcoming episode. So if you just thought, wait, that is me, make sure you're subscribed because you've probably been gifted your whole life and no one ever told you. So I remember quite clearly, painfully clearly, a time when I realized, I'm sure it wasn't the first time, but it was a time that it became so apparent to me that I was just a little much, and not even just a little much. I think I always felt that way growing up, but I was not like other people my age. So aside from the fact that I was a really fast learner and showed all the very stereotyped characteristics of being a gifted child, by the time I was a young adult, I just remember at that tender age being at a birthday party. And it was a group of people who actually were in their early to mid 20s. And I think I was maybe 18, but I was hanging out with people who were several years older than I was, which is also an indicator that you're probably gifted if when you were growing up, you tended to hang out with adults or older people. I'm at this birthday party at someone's house and everyone is, hanging out, having a good time. And I found myself, and I often found myself in these situations, but I found myself deep in conversation, like in a substantial conversation with someone's parent who was obviously way older than I was. But I remember thinking to myself, this conversation feels so much more satisfying to me than whatever else is happening right now at this party. And I often felt that way. Now, at this age, because I'm an old person now, or I'm an older person than I was when I was 18, I don't have that same experience because I get to choose in a different way the people I'm hanging out with. And the difference between an 18-year-old and a 30-year-old is really different than the difference between, say, a 35 and a 45-year-old hanging out, right? So when you're in that different developmental stage and your brain and your social and emotional needs just feel really different compared to your peers, it can make you think, what is wrong with me? Or maybe it was just me. I just thought, I didn't really think there was something inherently wrong with me. I just knew that clearly what was attractive for a lot of these people at this party was just not attractive to me. And I remember having enough awareness about the way I was wired to realize I don't think there's really anything wrong with me. And there's not anything wrong with these people at the party. It's just that I'm different. And by different, I meant I'm gifted. And I didn't feel bad about it, but I think a lot of gifted women grow up or have experiences like this. They don't realize it might be related to giftedness. They might just internalize it and think that there is something wrong with them, that they're broken in some way. So part of what I want to continue to teach and really say it over and over and over again is that you are not broken. If this starts to sound really familiar, I want you, if you never have before, to begin looking at your experiences in life through this lens of giftedness, and it will probably start to make a whole lot more sense. I want this podcast to really support you as a gifted woman. It's really here to empower you, to affirm you, and to remind you that you have the power already within you. You have the God-given power to flourish. You do not need to fix yourself. This podcast is going to explore these patterns with compassion and insight. This is not something that needs to be managed, okay? Your giftedness is something that needs to be honored and embraced and given space to flourish in your life. If something lit up in you as you listen today, trust it. You're not too much. You've just never been fully supported. And I want to encourage you to share this episode with someone else who needs to hear it. If you have a girlfriend, a sister, a mother, perhaps even a daughter who needs to hear this, and you think, I have this feeling they might be a gifted woman, then please share this. I want to help as many gifted women as I can. And please subscribe to the show. Until next time, remember, flourishing isn't a luxury, it's your birthright. I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Power to Flourish podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling more seen, more supported, and more deeply connected to yourself. And if this episode resonated, would you take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend? It's one of the best ways to help this work reach the women who need it most. You'll find show notes, links, and resources from today's episode at powertoflourish.com. And now just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not therapy, medical advice, or a substitute for professional support. And listening doesn't make me your therapist or doctor, though if you're looking for a coach, you know where to find me. All right, beautiful one, that's it for now. Until next time, trust yourself, honor your gifts, and keep flourishing.